Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, members and guests. It is October the 21st, 2024. This is a regular online meeting of the West Shore Photography Club. We have a before and after session this evening, which should be very interesting. But before we get to that, let's talk a little bit about upcoming events. Our next online meeting will be in 2 weeks. That's November the 4th. And here's what we have planned. I hadn't announced this yet, but we're going to follow up and do a somewhat similar session to tonight because we like to keep our members actively involved in the meetings. So we're going to do a show and tell. So here's the basic idea. You can submit any image, and I'll have you email it to me. I'll send the directions out tomorrow, most likely tomorrow. Email any image, and you will have probably 5 minutes to talk about that image. Now, you don't have to talk about processing like we're pretty much going to do tonight. You can tell the story behind the scenes. You can explain what you did, what you didn't do, anything you think members would be interested in regarding that photograph. Now, I think there's going to be a lot of interest, and you can imagine if we give everybody 5 minutes each, that's could extend. So it's a first come, first served basis. As soon as you get your image to me, and you can email it tonight if you want, you'll be on the list, and we'll take the people then during the meeting as time permits. Okay, that's what we have planned for November the 4th, show and tell. So Joe, let me turn it over to you for information about trips.
We had a trip, thanks, Dennis. We had a trip to Talion Lake a week or so ago. It was in the evening, it was a blue hour session. And it was one of those times when the light just did not participate. And Mary Fox and I, we talked and talked to the light, and we just couldn't get it to get its act together. So it was not one of our stellar trips, to say the least. So but it was not, it was a beautiful evening in terms of the weather, and it is a gorgeous lake. So we're going to do that again at some point, but we'll do it in the morning. So, and we had a trip on Saturday to Hopewell Furnace. Mark, do you want to tell us about that?
Sure, we had about 12 people there. We had, again, a beautiful day with not a cloud in the sky, unfortunately. So the light was a little on the hard side, but there was plenty of things to photograph, both inside and outside. I think most people were there probably the full time, somewhere around noontime, people started breaking up and heading on out. And it was enjoyable. We had a good time.
Great, thanks. Trips coming up. We had a trips meeting, as Denton mentioned, this past week. And so we got lots of things cooking. But we do have one coming up real soon, and that is the Harrisburg Cemetery. We did this last year at just about the exact same time, and it was absolutely stellar trip. This is a very old cemetery with lots of vines and trees growing up, but it's maintained the walkways, and so that's going to be on Saturday morning at 8 o'clock a.m. and we're doing it at 8 o'clock, even though I know that's midday for some. We're doing it at 8 o'clock because the light is really good, and maybe we'll get some fog, maybe, not likely, but it is an absolutely stellar spot. And so that'll be on Saturday, October 26th. We moved that one up earlier because we felt that the leaves are going to be really, really pretty at that point. And then another trip we have coming up in November 9th, and it's the Pine Grove Forest Walk. And that's always fun because we will be photographing people walking on trails, lots of foliage, lake, some water, little baby waterfalls. There's a lot of variety there, and hopefully the leaves will still be around on November the 9th. So those are the trips that we have immediately. There's about 5 or 6 other ones that will take place a little bit later. So that's the scoop, Dennis, from here.
Okay, thanks, Joe. I want to thank Mark Albano for volunteering to take ownership of tonight's meeting, the show or the before and after session. So at this point, I'll just turn it over to Mark. Go ahead. Thanks,
Okay,
buddy.
let me see if I can get it to share. Here we go. Can you see my,
Yes, it says no images in collection.
that's the one. All right. The way this works, we've got everybody who submitted, they submitted 2 images. One was kind of straight out of the camera and the other one was after it was processed. The way it works, you submit to me just like the show and tell is going to be. It's first come, first serve. So the first person up is Rod Frazier. And
Mark,
let
can
me-
you make that image
I'm
quite a bit
getting there.
larger? Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Okay, Rod, unmute yourself and talk about it.
Okay, can you hear me?
Sure can.
All right, this was at the Boiling Springs workshop. And I was doing macro with Elaine, so thanks to Elaine. And she should recognize this. It was like part of a nut on the ground. It actually kind of looked like a wooden hog snout. But anyhow, I took it and I thought I'd play with it just to see what happens.
Here's the after.
All right, and so what I did, I did it in Lightroom Classic, mainly in Lightroom Classic, and I always, in the beginning, I do auto, just kind of see what it looks like. And if I like it, then I'll leave it. If I don't like it, then I'll reset it. And this case, I think I liked it, so I left it. Then I went on and hit my lens correction, and then I cropped it to make this the centerpiece. Then I think I did a mask on the nut and mask on the subject. And then I worked on contrast and texture and clarity. And then I did a remask on the subject, but I inverted it and did a same thing. I did a contrast, texture, clarity, but I also reduced the exposure to bring out the brightness of the nut or whatever that thing is. Then I took it back and played with the colors to bring out the greens and attempted to bring out the browns a little bit. Then I go over to a preset and I play with those and I kind of like the way the vivid preset looked. So I added that. And then at the end, I usually take my photos to Adobe. I'll either do sharpen, well, in this case, I did Adobe Sharpen, and this was the final result.
Rod, when you say you bring it into Adobe, you mean Photoshop?
No, Adobe Sharpen AI.
Oh, Sharpen AI. Okay.
Yeah.
What, Topaz maybe?
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Topaz.
Okay.
Adobe on my mind.
Okay. Any questions or?
Or you can show them both side to side.
Yeah, that would be great.
See if I can do that and get some size out of them here. Hold on a second, folks. We're experimenting now.
Yeah. Or maybe
Yeah.
just jump back and forth between the two.
I can't get them any bigger, so we're gonna have to jump back and forth. Give me a second here. So that's the before,
The before.
that's the after.
Significant improvement, huh? Wow, that's
Yeah.
great.
Much more obvious.
Yeah.
Looks like you got like you said, a pig buried up to his nose.
Yeah.
It's kind of cool.
It looks like an owl to me.
Oh, that
Yeah,
too.
I can see that.
Barn owl, yeah.
Yeah.
Any other comments?
None.
Okay, well, thank you, Rod. Next person up is Joe Farrell.
Oh, there you go, Joe.
Okay,
Here you go, Hank.
show the before image there.
Yep.
Okay, great. This is a photograph. This is a photograph in the Faroe Islands, and it was right near where our hotel was. And one thing that I have learned since I've become a member of the West Shore Photography Club, which I have been for a while, is what Mike Donovan teaches us after every one of his image reviews. He says, you should go and check out this particular photographer or this particular painter, and it will help with your photography. And I've taken that to heart. So when I look at an image like this in the Faroe Islands, I say to myself, okay, what am I going to do with this? And I kind of have a real good idea at this point in time what I'm going to do with it, because I know that this is not a good image, but I also know with my camera that I have a lot of detail on that sky. And even though it looks completely washed out, it really isn't. And so I knew what I was going to do with this. And what I'm going to do with it before you flip it is I'm going to work and darken it down, and I'm going to work where the light is. And so could you go to the second image, Mark?
Yep. There you go.
Okay. Now this is the image that I would take that and make it very, very dark. And then I would very gradually bring up my exposure. And when I bring up the exposure gradually, certain things will start to pop through. And that tells me that that's where the natural light is. And then I'll take and I'll brighten some of those areas, maybe. Then I'll go up a little bit more in exposure. I get a feeling for where the light is hitting on the scene. And when it's hitting on the scene like that, I will then keep it dark, but then bring up all of those areas that there's a little bit of light, and I'll bring more light into it with the idea that I'm going to create some depth into the image. If you could flip back, Mark, could you go back?
Yep.
First? You can see here that there's really not much depth into the image, okay? And you might look at that and say, well, geez, Joe, I don't see the light that you're talking about. Well, if you go back to the dark one, Mark, it's actually there, okay? But that's why I have to darken it way down, and then I can start to see where it's starting to hit, and then I'll brighten that up. And now in this particular case, in the foreground walkway, I did actually manufacture that light. That wasn't natural right in there. And I did add that to give me a leading line into it. And the reason I mentioned about Mike Donovan, Mike, as you know, has taken us to Lebanon Valley College and the Susquehanna Art Museum, where we visit and we look at other artwork and photography. And he introduced me to the Hudson River School of Painters. This is like Church and Doran and others. And I fell in love with it. And this is exactly what they do in their paintings at the Hudson River School. And I've adopted that for a lot of my work. And that's what I've done. And that was all done in Lightroom. There would have been no Photoshop on that particular one. So, any questions?
Yeah, Joe, could you explain your black and white conversion process?
This one, actually, on this one here, I probably just used black and white on the profile, on the camera profile. I'm almost sure that's what I did. And then what I do is I do what I said about my lighting. I darken it down and I bring my light back. And then I'll go in and I'll try and make sure that I have some true blacks and some true whites. You can see in the sky, I'll have a true white up there. And then in some of the hills, I'll have a true black. I make sure I have that. And then I might add some contrast. But mainly what's driving it is the light. Did I answer your question?
Yes, yeah, and to brighten the areas, you use the masking tools in
I
Lightroom
use
Classic?
I use the radial filter almost exclusively anymore. I used to use the adjustment brush until they came out with the enhanced masking tools. And the reason why I use I don't use the brush is because it's too harsh. Whereas the radial filter, it can give me a very soft kind of a transition, much more realistic. But one thing you do have to watch, if you notice in the middle of the image, see where there's a big hump of, Mark, can you move and go to the left there, the black mountain to the left?
Oh, right there.
Right in there. Okay. When you do this that I'm talking about, it's very easy to get halos on that edge of that rock because it's bright in the background and it's dark in the foreground, all the way around that rock on the top there, Mark. That you'll get a halo up in here. And actually I developed a way, I stole it from somebody that actually removes those halos and it does a really good job. And I did have a halo on that one because I knew that tremendous contrast between the dark and the light.
Yes, I've used your recommended technique, Joe, and it works very well.
Doesn't it work right? It really does.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a dramatic, difference in the images.
Can you give us a hint on the halo removal?
The halo.
I've seen some, but I don't know what you're using.
Well, it's not a thing that you try. It's not like a brush that you do. You have to, it's a technique of using the clone stamp tool and using in Lightroom a blend mode of dark. And you rub it along, believe it or not, right on that edge, and it just takes the halo away, and nobody would ever know that you cheated and did that. So, Dennis, I can copy that out and send it to you. You can send it off maybe with one of the emails that you have.
That would be great. I'll include it with the recording tomorrow morning.
Okay, well, I may not have it done by then, but
I'll give you till midnight tonight.
all right, I got homework. No, I wasn't supposed to get homework on this, Mark. You didn't tell me I had to do homework.
It's rigged. Usually we save that for Mike, but
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes.
anything else?
Hey, Joe, Don Uvik.
Yes.
Just a question. The next to that one rock that you were talking about, are there wires in there or a bridge?
Yes, there is.
Okay, okay. I was curious
Yeah.
about that.
Right, there is, and I didn't take those out.
Oh, comment on that. Photoshop. Adobe just came out with an update
Yep.
to Photoshop.
Mhm.
One of the new features is automatic wire and cable removal. You don't do anything except click on the button and it locates wires and cables and automatically clones them out.
And it
I
works.
just on Facebook today, I posted a link to Colin Smith's video that explains the feature. It's really very cool.
Even
Yeah,
that subtle? Because it's such, I mean, it's very hard to see. I had to kind of zoom in on my computer to see that. Would it have eliminated that? I mean,
Probably not. Probably
yeah,
not.
okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's great, fantastic
In
photo.
fact, I can't see them.
Yeah.
on my
Joe, I'm
computer.
proud of you for leaving them in.
Well, you know, over in the Faroe Islands, there's not too much there. And that's
Yeah.
the only part of humanity and whatever you'd see there. So,
Okay. Okay,
This
Joe,
is-
thanks a lot.
This is Judy. I just wanted to comment on the Photoshop removal. I didn't get to look at that video yet, Dennis, but I did actually use that technique and it worked very well.
Oh, okay, good, good.
Okay.
Hey, Joe, may I ask one question about your picture?
wait a minute, we get permission from Mark.
No,
Mark?
that's okay. Go ahead.
All right.
Okay, the question is this. I've read about the process of doing exactly what you did to go from the color to the black and white to get the light correct. Do you then put it back into color?
No, no.
Just-
Can you go back to the original one, Mark?
Sure.
That to me, when I see that, that screams black and white to me. but I love black and white too. Okay, so that's what it screams to me. Now, I could have done the same thing, I guess. I couldn't in color. I could have done exactly the same in color, and I would have had a color image. Yeah.
No, I mean, do it in black and white and then convert it back into color.
No, I would do the color first, and then I would take it to black and white. That's how I would do it. But yes.
Yeah, Joe,
Okay.
I think that image, the processing dramatically demonstrates the power of shooting in RAW. Yeah, what you
Yeah.
did with the sky, especially.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting because I used to do HDR in the camera. I'd take two stops under, one in normal, and then two stops over. And
Yeah.
now with the new technology of cameras, I just don't do that anymore. And I still can pull out all the detail that I want. And if I have any hint of noise, I use the Photoshop denoise, and it just takes it right out. It's phenomenal.
Okay. Thank you,
Okay.
Joe.
Okay.
Next up is Dave Marchetto.
Thanks for doing all this, Mark.
Oh, glad to.
You just showed the before.
That's the before.
So this is an infrared image I'm going to talk about and how I converted it. Let me just say this whole infrared issue is very interesting to me. And let me just offer to the club members who may be considering converting a camera to an infrared type of camera, or purchasing one that's already converted, or maybe getting some lenses that might be suitable. I'd be glad to talk to anybody. I'm no expert at it, but I could tell you how I kind of went about getting a converted camera, which is this is from, and it might just save you a little bit of time and money. Maybe I could just get you on the right path. So this is out of the camera, and I chose to do it this way just to show you the challenge that I have when I get an image from an infrared negative, so to speak. And so I shot this with a 720 nanometer filter, which filters out UV light and almost all visible light. So here you get this huge tinge of red. The image is raw, and it's an auto white balance. You can see this isn't very useful. And when I show you what I did to transfer, you'll see the bench on the left, which is I'm going to clone out. And then there's a tree trunk mark way on the right that I got rid of, way on the right. It's in the right edge. Keep going. Yeah, it's up a little bit. Yeah, so I got rid of that. It didn't seem to be doing too much for me. So go ahead and convert to black and white, Mark. So how did I do this? Well, in my simple way of doing this, I desaturated it. That's the way it made most sense to me. I'm pretty new at this. So I was concerned that I was going to lose detail, even though it's in RAW. Club members said I wouldn't, lose detail by desaturating it. And I called Adobe just to get a second opinion. And they said, by desaturating it, you don't lose any, information other than the red tinge, the red color. I don't think that's the best way necessarily to do it. I'm really new to infrared. It just seems too simplistic to me. And from what I can understand, not everybody just desaturates it. Developing a custom white balance and all the rest of it seems to be the way some of the people go. But anyway, so I desaturated it, and then I just used the sliders the way most people would do to process a black and white image. I made this a little bit less contrasty, bumped up the whites, the highlights I bumped up. If you look at the clouds in back of the trees, they're pretty much tending to be overexposed. I liked it that way because it gave me separation from the sky, the clouds to the trees. That's where I had the biggest concern with this image. I just wasn't getting the separation, maybe like on the left. So that was, really important to me. The only other thing I'll say, I put a pretty strong vignette on this. And the reason I did that is because the foreground, the grass was so light that I thought I could do with a little bit of a heavier vignette just to make it a little bit more contrasting. So anyway, that's that's what I'm up to. This infrared experience is just fascinating to me, and this is only the second or third image I've processed, so I have a lot to learn, but it's a lot of fun, and I encourage you to maybe get a filter or maybe even a converted camera and go forth. So Mark, that's what I've got.
Okay, great. Anybody have any comments, questions? Awful quiet out there.
I have a question for Joe Farrell. Joe, when you shoot with an 850 nanometer filter, you probably don't get that red tinge, do you?
No, I don't. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
No, I don't. I have a converted camera, and I've bypassed the color conversion process that you're seeing. Everything is in black and white, so to speak.
Right,
And
right.
I did that for simplicity purposes, because I'm not too good at Photoshop, so that's why I did that.
Do you find the 850 is somewhat too contrasty, with the black sky and the whiter whites than the 720? Do you have any thoughts about that, Joe?
No, I do, and I knew that it would have that darker sky, and if I were to convert it like this, and I saw that, I would immediately darken the sky. That's just the way I'm wired, and that's what I would have done. So, and I tried some filters, and I used some people's cameras before I ended up using the converted camera from LifePixel.
Yeah, I bought a converted camera. It's the 720 nanometer bypass filter. I got it on eBay, and it just seems to be working very, very well. It's a lot of fun. Apparently, you can get some false color out of the 720 image you're looking at here. I'm not quite sure how to do that, and I don't really want the color in there, but I think some people can get false color out of a 720. And of course, if you get another filter, much less than 720, you can get all kinds of false color.
Okay.
Thanks, Mark.
Dave. Thank you. Next up is George Ryan.
Okay, if you show the before.
Oh, George. Hold on a second. I got to do yours the hard way.
Okay.
All right. Go. That's the before.
Okay. Yeah. It right there in the center is where the real action is, of course, and much of the rest is quite peripheral. And so the first thing I did was to crop it. Yeah, to get down to what I really wanted. And then I changed the tone somewhat. I'm not so sure what else I did to it. And now I can get up here my Lightroom thing. Oh yeah, okay, here. I pasted settings. Now I can't recall what those settings were, and I've already deleted the thing from which I pasted the settings. So it's probably it was to change the tone control a bit, the temperature, but possibly not. It may have been something very innocuous. Then I have a whole bunch of crops. I must have 7 crops here, and then squared it up by changing the crop angle. And then I changed the temperature. It says minus 2.7 K to 8.3 K, I think. It's hard for me to read. It's kind of small. And when I enlarge it, I just enlarge the picture. I don't enlarge the stuff here. Then I exported it to the hard drive. Then I brought it back. I don't know why I did that. Brought it back, changed the crop angle again, used the new generation to remove spot. Now that spot was the girl who's standing to the left. She just disappeared. Okay. Then
This
I
girl,
cropped
this girl here.
Let me see what you got here.
This girl here is the one that disappeared.
Yeah, she just gone.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to be brutal, but that's just the way it is. Then I applied lens blur in Lightroom. Sometimes that works pretty well when you can separate your subject from the background. And I could here, I just didn't, the backgrounds in these games are generally pretty wretched. If you got the stands behind you, the players seem to just to blend right into the stands. It's very hard visually to separate them. So I applied the lens blur. I updated the focus range, what you can in the lens blur thing. That's really a nifty kind of a feature. Updated focus range, update depth refinement, cropped at a final time, and then I exported it. So there weren't too many dramatic changes. Basically cropping and removing that one little girl, and then the top part of this, you can see where it's blurred, and I didn't do it absolutely successfully. Above the girl who's in the blue shirt, right above her right shoulder, that stanchion or whatever it is in pretty good focus, and then it goes out of focus up over her shoulder.
Okay. George, important question. Who won?
Who won? Dickinson won.
Oh, good.
By a heap. Now I might be going out of focus here because I've got this new this new gizmo, which has both the photo and the voice of the microphone, and I've got it sort of duct taped to the top of my subsidiary screen, and it's a bit warm, and the tape's getting warm, and so it starts to move around. I still got to figure out where to attach it and how. Anyway, this I didn't take quite as much time with this as I would if it were just one. But after a game, I end up with 400 or 500 shots, which I then have to call, and then I improve them as I have this one, and the best 24 to 44 or so I send to the coach, who then sends them to the players. Does me no good just to keep them on my hard drive, so I like to share them. But this was one of the, well, many action shots, and I thought that it was a good one to present because of the yellow jersey, just jumps right out at you.
Great, thanks. Any questions, comments? Okay.
I might have missed it, but what was the lens that was used here?
Oh my God. Now I could tell you, except I can't tell you. And the reason I can't is that my Lightroom was updated, and that information is no longer there, and I don't know how to get it back except to update it again.
Hey, George.
Yeah.
George, I think you, based on the data that's with the picture, you used a 75 millimeter.
That would be 75 to 300.
Okay, and that would be equivalent. He uses micro four thirds, so that would be equivalent to 150 millimeter lens.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And that's as short as I can get the darn thing. It is very useful, because from one end of the field, I can get close-up shots at the other because it's equivalent of 600.
Right.
And shutter speed was at least 1200, I assume, or?
No, it was 1/400th of a second at ISO 800 at
Oh,
f5.
wow. 1/400. Okay, that's shocking.
Well, that's what it is. Maybe
Yep.
the girls move as fast as the guys. I took some pictures. 2 days ago, I had it at 1,000th. So, and everything came. Didn't have any blur except where it didn't pick up focus.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions? Thank you, George.
You're very welcome.
Next up is Mike Donovan.
Okay. This is the before. And one thing that I started to enjoy doing is some still life. So I've been practicing. I'm still learning. Hey, go back to the first one.
Oh, I thought this was the first one.
No, that's the first one.
Forgive me.
All right, I will let it slide.
All right. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
What we have is I took an online course about still life, and the person that did the course uses a lighting at 90 degrees. So the light source is a cheap studio light with a softbox on it, and it's on, as you can see, on the left side. So there's nothing at a 45-degree angle and with hair light and this and that. It's strictly a softbox shooting straight across the table. And the table is an old box that I had bought at a sale years ago. And the background is a gray paper. And you can see a couple folds in it. And the reason that gray was suggested is because when you do certain blend modes with textures, the gray disappears and it's all about the texture. So what I wanted to do with this was make it look, first of all, old, vintage, that kind of look. Okay, Mark.
Okay.
So what I did with this was, first of all, I straightened it out, because when there's lines on the table, if they're too far out of whack, it's obvious, of course. Now, the table is ancient, so there are some things that are crooked that I let be crooked. The textures, for lack of a better word, you see how the gray background just disappeared, and it was all about the texture. That was what was called an overlay blend mode. And what a blend mode does is there's maybe 20 or 25 different blend modes, and each one does a different thing. And what the overlay does is finds things that are light in tone and replaces it with the texture. I brushed out, well, I used two textures. And what I did was I used a less powerful texture on the radishes and the stronger texture on the background. And the way I got that to happen is I put the strong texture on, and then you can mask out the radishes and the leaves and all. Then put another texture on and inverted the mask so that it did the opposite, and put the texture only on the radishes and the leaves and so on. So it's two different textures. The effect is reversed on both of them. I straightened it out, as I said, as best I could. I wanted a vintage look, so I tried to clean it up enough that wasn't bothersome, but still had some marks and some dings in it. The pot is a handmade pot I bought over at Hack when they used to have student ceramic sales, and that's even a little bit crooked. So all of that should add to a vintage old look is what I was after. And I did all this in On One, which has like, I don't know, 35,000 million textures. And Mark, by the way, not one preset was used. All textures. So the point of the class that I took was actually to learn to use textures in a still life. So I've been doing that. And what you can do is once you get your table set up and your light set up, just start pulling out stuff that you want to photograph, and then you can process it later. And you can even, and I'm sure that Lightroom does this too, you can save your steps in a history, or it's called a snapshot in On1, and then apply it if you want a series that has the same style. So I've been working on some of those things. Some, it makes it nice in the winter. We pull out a couple oranges and see what you can do. So so that's the before and after.
Okay, Mike, thanks. Any comments, questions? So Mike, this was all done in On1?
Yes, correct.
Okay.
Nice job.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, Mike, I'll
Mike,
ask a question.
Mike,
Or
this
go-
is Dave Marchetto. Can you just explain how you got the nice sort of like halo effect for the background? You didn't see that in the first version at all, and I guess I just might have missed it. How did you get the sort of light and then the fading out to the darker
Okay, well,
background?
the first version had just a piece of gray paper.
Right.
Now this version,
Yeah.
there's nothing like that there. So the blend mode replaced the gray completely with the texture. So that halo-y thing is part of the texture. So the texture, whoever built the texture, built it with sort of like a vignette around a lighter part.
That's
And I
really
thought-
cool. Yeah.
I thought it would fit perfectly with the leaves, so that's the one I went with.
Yeah, it's very effective.
Thanks.
Okay. Dennis, you had a question.
Well, Mike, I sensed an aversion to presets. Would you explain that for the folks, please?
That's an ongoing discussion between Mark and myself.
Okay.
Mark is a purist, and
No, I'm not.
anytime I get an email from On1 that says you can download 10 free presets, I do it.
Oh,
I
okay.
probably have like 250 presets.
So you're actually a
millions of
fan of
them.
presets.
And Dennis, they send out, get your free presets once a month.
I know they do. That's true.
Or
So a
twice.
preset is actually, it describes itself really. It's a setting of temperature and contrast and lightness and darkness and that kind of thing that will create different effects for you. So there's presets that are called vintage, presets that are called snowstorm, and presets that are, so it's things that are already set up for you, so you don't have to do it. Then you put that on your picture, and then you can adjust it to how you want. This doesn't have any of those. This is all textures.
Okay, Mark, you have 60 seconds to respond to that.
I think I'll pass.
Oh, okay,
Good
very
idea.
good. Very good.
Okay, Mike, thank you.
You're welcome.
Dan Olson, it's your turn.
All right.
Get
Yeah,
this
this is a photo I took just a week ago, and that was it's in Bedford. We have built a place a couple years ago in Bedford, and so it's on 24 acres. And then this is the edits I'd made to it. In short, it was I think I probably did go to I'll often just go to auto and then tweak it if I think it did some good, then tweak it from there, kind of thing. But ultimately, exposure was roughly on, but obviously it appeared to be a lot more colorful, of course, and you get the flat image and you want to kind of jazz it back up to what your eyeball saw. So that's kind of what I did. And I didn't do select subject or anything like that. I just kind of took the picture because the colors in the house didn't really get too affected by just doing global changes. So it was up in vibrance and saturation, not crazy, but a little bit. And then For texture and clarity, I always play with those just to see what I like, but that was negative on texture and up and on clarity, and I kind of like the look that came about on that. And then the grass patch to the lower right there, when I went back through it, it came out like deader and uglier than what it was originally. So I did select that goofy patch of grass just outside the house there on the right, and then kind of greened it up a little bit. Not so much that it matched perfectly, but enough to take it so it didn't look like there was a grass fire or something kind of ugly going on there. And then the other edit was you can see there's some barns down there to the lower left, and so I couldn't take them out. I did do a select. I even merged it with a color select and object select, or whatever the two I combined, and never could get it to work quite right because there's so many tree trunks, kind of going up and down in there. So I never did get that to work quite right. So what I did is I selected best I could and then just kind of dulled the whites down a little bit just so it wasn't so obnoxiously flaring bright white, if you will. And then the last thing, and only thing I use Photoshop for ever, is I did try to do a sky replacement. I shopped around and never did see anything that looked natural, but I stuck with this one, which seemed to kind of complement the colors that were going on there. So I think that might have been about it. Yeah, there you go. That's about it.
Okay. Any questions, comments?
Yeah, I've got a question.
ahead.
How did you crop this?
I'm sorry. I think I did 5x7. I'm almost always, unless there's a reason that the picture isn't complemented, I'll often just go to the 5x7 and then rescale it. I think it cropped down a little bit, but it wasn't like a huge crop down, but it probably adjusted. Usually it takes a little off left and right. And then I did not exactly thirds, but I did push so I had more negative space to the left because that huge window in front of the house, which is kind of the centerpiece of it, I wanted more negative space, to the left of the picture where the windows were looking out. It seemed to be
Well,
more.
the reason I asked, if they're on the left of that white barn and so forth, if you had a little bit more material,
Right.
out, if you had more, you could just clone that and just
Clone it. Yeah. That might have worked, right? Yeah.
And it's pretty easy to do, especially if you mask the light green there.
Right.
And then do it. Then you can get it pretty much exact.
Yeah, it was either that or buy the neighbor's property and then take the buildings down. But yeah, I like your approach better.
Takes too long.
Yeah.
One other thing, I'm just wondering about the sky. Did you
Yes.
think of dropping it down from the top and just removing that sky?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, I go through that thought process a lot because it is kind of nice, and we have Pennsylvania mountains. They're not Colorado mountains like Judy enjoys. So I stand back quite a ways, zoom in a bit, kind of, which kind of brings in the Pennsylvania mountains there a little bit. And I always kind of think leaving a little bit of sky, tells a story of how high of a hill / mountain you're looking at behind you. So I do have somewhere I do crop it down to just trees. And so, yeah, I do like that. I'm always kind of torn right between the two. In this instance, I decided to try to do a sky replacement. The other skies with the clouds and the blue, it just didn't work. And this was the one that I found that seemed to work at least a little bit. But yeah, I've done that as well. That's a good idea.
That grass patch, you really did well with that. It looks 1,000% better in this version.
Yeah, thanks. And I've taken pictures before and I've never noticed that, but this time I don't know if it was the initial edits I did or what it was, but all of a sudden it turned into a black chunk and you're like, ooh, that was yucky. So right, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it was not to bring it back so it matched the other ones, but bring it back enough where it wasn't, distracting, I guess.
Yeah, juicing up the color and the trees, I think, really improved it a lot.
Yep. And honestly, to the eyeball, it did feel like it was closer to that. So I didn't feel like I was totally faking it up. I mean, it did have a lot more natural color than what was in the original flat picture.
Did you say you use vibrance or did you use saturation on that?
Yes and yes.
Oh,
In fact, I did three things. I upped saturation +11, vibrance +18, and then actually upped temperature +7 into yellow. So a little bit of everything.
Well, it worked.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, Dan, I appreciate your comment you made about leaving more space on the left, because with that big window in the house, it actually looks like the house is looking in that direction.
Right. And then, in fact, yeah, because in fact, the house, we put it that direction because there's a little bit bigger of a mountain of, between the Blue Ridges there, because this is on 220 between Maryland and Bedford there. And so, yeah, we're looking up to the Blue Ridge, looking out the windows that way. But this image just captures a little better on the house. The front side of the house is a little more boring.
Yeah. An interesting comment on the sky and your comment about cropping down. Actually by cropping out the sky and not showing any of it, it may give the impression to the viewer that the mountain is even higher than it is because they don't see the top of
Yes.
it.
Yeah, I've done that, and my wife disagreed with me on that assessment. So in fact, that's her fault. That's why I did this one this way.
Yeah, right. Yeah, blame it on your wife, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that always goes over well.
As long as she's not in the room.
No.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments? Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Jean.
There we go. Hello.
Hi.
Yes, we went on the field trip to Landis Valley Museum this summer. And some people noticed, I call him the wheat man, beside the one farmhouse there. And this is straight out of camera. So I took it into Lightroom, and I usually start in Lightroom and end up in Photoshop. So in Lightroom, I did the background separation and darkened the background a bit. And it's my personal thing, an aversion to the neon green yellow. And so I usually take the eyedropper tool in there and adjust that, and then take the saturation down a little bit of that green. There were a lot of bugs because it was a little natty that day. So I did do the bugs. I am not a fan of the clone tool in Lightroom. So anytime I want to really clone something, it goes into Photoshop. So after all that, then I took it over into Photoshop. And you can go, yeah, there we are. So I had actually put this up on the site a couple weeks ago, and Joe had asked a question about the depth that I was able to get with this. So I knew when I took the picture that I wanted it to be warm, because I knew exactly where I was going to hang it once I get it printed. And I was in a warm day mindset. And so I think I made it a little warmer than what I wanted to when I took it over into Photoshop, but it'll be fine where it's hanging. So I learned a lot from Meg Bitton. She is a child photographer out of New Jersey. And she does a lot of fine art and illustrative art on her images. And I knew when I was taking this shot that that's what I was going to do with it. So I wasn't all that worried about getting everything super right in camera, because what I do in Photoshop then is pretty extensive. There's actually a warm photo filter on this, and I think I actually put that on there twice. It's in your library panel. And then there's also a black texture, and then if you look at it really close, you can see the canvas texture on it. I personally like it. I usually lighten it up even more than what I did here. And in masking, I always take it off of the eyes and the skin. I usually let my textures on the clothing a little bit, but it's more prominent on the background. I also masked them off of some of the individual wheat buds, just so that they would pop a little bit more. So when I do the fine art or the illustrative, it's a 3-part process. And what you do is when you get it basically where you want it, then you go into your camera raw filter and you go in there and you, let me see here. In the light panel of that, you do -35. You bump up your contrast by 7. You bump up your shadows by 88. And then you go into your effects panel and you do a +100 clarity. And it's going to look, you're going to go, what did I just do? You're going to say, okay. And then you're going to go back and you're going to do that again. And Meg usually does that 3 times. I usually stop at twice. So you go back in, you do all of that. And then that second time, if you're, if it's your shadows are starting to look really muddy, you want to back down your shadows and your clarity a little bit and just keep an eye on your highlights. You don't want them completely blown out, but they will be a lot brighter than what you anticipate. So then after you get that where you want it, you hit OK again. And that is just like any other layer in Photoshop. You can adjust the opacity on that to where you like it. I probably took that down to about 60 or 70%. And then I go back in and it's not a preset. I didn't know there was such a thing about presets, but I use a lot of actions. And the action that I use is dodge and burn, which you can also go into your adjustment layer and do a dark and then a light. And you're going to do like a 50% gray on those. So in my action, then I take my brush at 20%, and in my dodge portion of that action, I'll go over any light areas, just like Joe was saying about in his black and white images, how he does the slider. It's about the same thing. It's just a different way to go about it. So any of the light areas in the image were already light, but I just went in and enhanced them, especially like his beard and his highlights on his cheekbones and his hat, and again in the different pieces of the wheat. And then when you're doing that, you also really want to remember to carry that over into your background, because if you just do it on your subject and not your background, it's not going to be cohesive. And then you just do the same thing with your burn, and you go into all your shadows and anything you want to really accent darker, you'll go in and do that as well. And you can go into that action then and adjust the opacity again on your layers panel. And I think after that is when I did my vignette. I like my corners and my sides darker just to make my subject pop out a little bit more. So basically that's it. Did I use up my 5 minutes?
Oh yeah. Yeah, no problem.
Sorry.
No, Gene, I saw him too, and I couldn't figure out what he was harvesting. So I asked him. It's actually flax.
Okay, I just called him Wheat Man. I didn't know
Yeah.
it was flax.
Yeah.
Okay, Flax Man then.
Just so you know, that's all.
Thank you.
Any questions?
Gene, I have,
Comments?
this is Joe.
Okay.
Hi, Joe.
Are those light shafts coming in off the upper right down towards his head? Did you create those, or was that natural?
The lighting was coming that way, but yes, I did add my own light rays. I have a light rays brush that I use. And so I took the color yellow right from the image and made my brush that color and did a 10% and just did a quick wash around it, but I did mask it off of his face. I don't usually let my textures and anything like that go on the face.
Thank you.
Sure.
Anything else? Great. Thanks, Jean.
Sure.
Next up is Rich. Let's see if I can get this down to where it belongs before you. All yours, Rich.
Okay, so this was from the Hopewell trip that we did this weekend, and then so I took this photo, and then on the what I did was I cropped it a little bit, straightened it on the final product there. I took the clone tool to get rid of that bar, so you can go to the next one, Mark.
Okay.
And then I took that clone tool and I got rid of that piece of iron that was in there. And then I set the black and white points. I took the shadows up and I brought the highlights down. And then I went and I masked the sky because the sky was pretty bright. And so I took the exposure down one stop. And then I took the contrast down. And then I took the highlights down -20 and the shadows up +19 just on the sky area. And then I went back to the main photo and I increased the saturation a bit. And that's kind of what I did. So it was pretty simple. I'm not sure what else I could do with it. I'm trying to, trying to learn all this. So it's the first time I submitted an image. So
Rich, you did a great job of showing how clear and blue the sky was Saturday.
Oh, thanks.
Any questions or comments?
Yeah, hey, one comment here is I know when I've tried to do that with a sky, I've had varied results, but here it looks like the sky that, is in between the trees or within the trees, if you will, that came out clean and not like smudging into the leaves themselves or whatever. I mean, it looks really natural, and that's I don't know, sometimes that doesn't always work out that way, but this looks fabulous.
No, thank you.
What kind of mask did you use? Did you use the sky mask or did you use a?
I did the sky mask.
Okay.
And I got lucky because it picked everything out that was there and it kind of worked out.
Well, that's
So I
great.
played with it a little bit, trying to get figuring out which way to go.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Great. Thank you, Rich. Next is Elaine.
Okay, this is one of many shots that I took of the Dock Street Dam in Harrisburg on one very bright sunny day. I have a bit of an obsession with water, so I'm always looking for different ways to photograph it, whether it's for just to show the contrast in moods in water or reflections or refractions. In this particular dam, I found it very interesting that there was such a huge contrast between the water falling over the dam and the water at the bottom of the dam splashing up and becoming very turbulent. So my focus really was to show nothing but water. Now, this photo that you're looking at right now is obviously very boring, very flat, and it doesn't demonstrate what I was going for. So my intent all along was to create a great deal of contrast between the water and the water of the dam and the water around it. So really nothing, you're seeing nothing but the water itself around the dam. To draw attention to that contrast between the falling water and the turbulent water. This was actually a 2-second exposure, and I did that to create more kind of a violent motion, if you will, in the water coming up or swirling around at the bottom of the dam. So naturally, I had to use a ND 64, which is like a 60 or a 6-stop light reduction on top of a polarizer. So that resulted in a very, very flat photo overall. So you can also see that there are some major distractions, like to the bottom left, where there's some reflections in the water that's kind of on the side of the dam, if you will. You can see some light spots in the bottom right. That's actually, I think, a reflection of the wall of the walkway next to that dam. But also there are some, you can see through the water. So there's some things in the bottom too that are very distracting. And up at the top left corner, there's some light coming from the bridge. That's actually the I-83 underpass. So there's some light coming through that I wanted to get rid of. So go to the next one, please.
Okay.
I cropped out all of the, most of the distracting elements in there. But at the same time, I actually kind of, while I was cropping it, I angled it a bit to the left, so there maybe 30 degrees, just to bring that interesting angle up from the bottom left up to the right. Increased clarity considerably to increase the contrast between the background and the water itself. Took down the highlights again. Even though I had shot dark, it was still some, not blown out, but some very bright highlights that were kind of obscuring some of the detail. So just to bring out more detail, I did decrease the highlights substantially, but increase the whites at the same time to bring back some of the brightness without blowing anything out, but increase the blacks at the same time, which helps to increase some of that contrast. Increase clarity just slightly, increased vibrance slightly, because this is not a black and white photo. And I kind of liked the color, the green color, which was reflected off of the trees behind me, and some of the bluer tones in the water. I thought it gave it a little bit of interest. Also changed the white balance, bumped it down to make a little cooler. The light was very warm. I thought it looked better with a cooler tone. What else did I do here? Overall, I increased the contrast by using the tone curve and switched from linear contrast to medium contrast. Did not change the exposure slider at all. I typically never do, because I prefer to do selective adjustments. The only thing I did in masking was to create a mask at the top left-hand corner to increase darkness a little bit, where there was some light that was shining through that I was not crazy about. But also with a brush, I brushed along that interesting curve in the bottom left-hand corner, just to bring out the clarity of that. I can't demonstrate it for you here. Yeah, that line was a little bit muddy in the original, so I brushed over that and increased clarity substantially around that. One of the things that I was trying to draw attention to as well in this photo by increasing the contrast was that little reflection coming off the bottom of the falling water. Yes, right there. It's kind of a combination of a reflection and a refraction. I thought that it just added a little bit of interest, something I had never seen quite like that before. But also the blue reflection at the top of those falls was interesting. So I increased the blue saturation and the blue luminosity just to bring attention to that a little bit. Other than that, I think that's all I did. Um, oh, I did take a brush to the top right-hand corner because as I increased blacks and clarity, some of that water up at the top there went away. So I brushed over that and brought the light back up, increased the whites, just to make sure that there was some continuity in that angle from the bottom left of the photo up to the top right, just to show that there was water all along there. Otherwise, it left it a bit out of balance, and I think leaving that in there increases the depth of the photo a little bit. That's all I
Okay.
did.
Thanks, Elaine. Any questions, comments?
I like this damn photo.
Yeah,
Oh, God.
I like the pun too.
Thank you.
You know, Elaine, when I first saw those, I said, "Oh, this is cool, black and white." And then I noticed, like you said, you left the green, you know, the colors in, and to me, it just it made the image a little nicer. I really liked that.
I did try it in black and white, and
You did.
I didn't like it.
Okay.
The last photo that I showed in the review a couple of weeks ago was in black and white.
Mhm.
It worked well on that one, but it just didn't impress me on this one.
It's amazing sometimes how just some subtle colors can make all the difference.
Elaine, did you shoot this during the middle of the day? And how many stops down? I think you already told us.
Yeah, I did. This was probably 10:30 in the morning. Very clear, bright sky, not a cloud in the sky. So it was very harsh light. I used the camera's internal ND filter, which was, so it was set at ND 64, which is like 6 stops down, but also had a polarizer on at the same time. So I was shooting very dark, but because it was a 2-second exposure and it was very bright out, it was impossible to get the dark spots around the falls as dark as I wanted it.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Anybody else? Well, Elaine, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Now it's my turn. I was last year, I was about this time last year, I was in Cape May, doing some bird photography actually. And we were driving around and came across this wreck out in the water. And I've been watching some videos of a guy who from the UK who does minimalist fine art photography. So I said, this looks like a good chance to do it. Midday, it was all covered in cormorants, and there was another chunk of stuff here with cormorants all over it. So I said, you know, I bet if I come back in the evening, it'll be much better. I got back about 6 o'clock, and the cormorants were all gone. The other piece of the boat was underwater. The seas were calm. As you can see here, we had good maritime clouds. This was shot, this was 30-second shot at f11, about 135 millimeters. Like I said, I mean, it didn't have to do a 2-minute or anything like that to get a real calm water here. And then I converted it to black and white. And the challenge here was I was trying to get rid of as much of the horizon line as I possibly could. And that was a challenge. I ended up taking them, masking separately the ocean and the sky, and feathering them into each other at the seams. And I did all this in Capture One, which is like doing it all in Lightroom. Because I didn't want to go into Photoshop or anything like that, because I just don't use them enough, and I don't understand how they work very well. And so I did that, and I did some things to smooth out the sky, so the sky was kind of monotone. I kind of like the way it goes from a little darker in the water to lighter up in the sky. And I took out there was an orange buoy right here, and I took that out, and this is what I ended up with. Oh, by the way, just a brief history. This is a boat that was called the SS Atlantis. It was an all concrete transport ship built during World War I that they decided it wasn't efficient. It used too much fuel. And after the war, it was sold to a guy who used it as the ferry between Cape May and I think the Rehoboth Beach area or something like that in Delaware. And during a storm, it broke its moorings, drifted out, went aground. They went to pull it off. They went to pull it off the sandbar, and it was heavy because it was concrete and didn't succeed. So they left it there to break up over the years. So it's been there since around, as a hulk like this, since around 1926. So, any questions, comments? All right. One last one, and that's Dennis.
Okay, I'll wrap things up here.
Yep.
About 2 weeks ago at the campground in Delaware, they had an early trick or treat. So I made it my mission to go around and photograph the various sites and activities, and started out really well, went through the blue hour, and by the time I got to this site, this is what I ended up with. Things were pretty dark. And I picked this particular image to illustrate the advantages of shooting in RAW format, primarily. The contrast was horrendous here. I was shooting in manual exposure mode with auto ISO. And I left it that way. I was at a shutter speed of 1/160th of a second, so I didn't get camera shake. And I was shooting at f5.6, so I had a little depth of field because of the scenes that I was photographing, and then left the ISO go on auto, and it ended up at 16,000, for this particular image. So I used no flash, and it was handheld. So as you can see, it's very dark. It lacks any detail in the shadow areas. And my couple there, Bruce and his wife, they're somewhat eliminated by that spotlight down in the lower right-hand corner, but not adequately. So Mark, if you would proceed to the finished image, that's what I ended up with. Cropped it a little bit, and of course, increased the overall exposure quite a bit by about 2.5 stops, I think, from the original. Took the highlights, and I'm working in Lightroom Classic, took the highlights down to -100 and the shadows up to +100. I actually ran it through. It was a little, as you can imagine, at 16,000 ISO, it was a little bit noisy. So I ran it through Topaz AI, which sharpened and denoised it a bit. And then one last step was to do a little digital dodging and burning. So I darkened that spotlight down in the lower right-hand corner, and then brightened the lines that you follow among the tombstones. And then with a brush in Lightroom Classic, and used a radial filter around Bruce and his wife, to brighten them. So I went from a very underexposed image to something that was what I think is workable. But the dodging and burning added a lot, I think, of depth and dimension to the image. So, questions or comments?
Okay.
Dennis, I have a question for you. Are you finding that you use the radio filter more than you use the brush in Lightroom?
I'm a big fan of the radial filter, but I also use the brush a lot. And when I do, I use usually a very soft brush with a lot of feathering. And then, that gives you a nice transition between the effect and no effect. So I find myself using both probably equally as much.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions for Dennis? All right. Well, back to you, Dennis.
Okay, sounds good. Mark, thank you very much for running the show tonight. And for the 10 other people who submitted images, Thank you very much. And especially the people like Rich Hudson, for his first time, submitting an image and putting himself up in front of everybody else. It wasn't that bad, was it, Rich? You're not bleeding at all. So I
No,
want
not
to
at all.
encourage other people. I mean, we had a lot of veterans here, a lot of people who submit all the time. So my plea to you for the next meeting on November the 4th is consider submitting an image. It'll be even easier because we're not involved with processing. You're going to tell a story behind your image, behind the scenes, or about your photograph. So that makes it very easy. So please consider submitting an image. So tomorrow morning, I'll get the follow-up email out with the link to the recording, and I'll include, and I want to give Joe credit here, Joe has already sent me his directions that I asked for earlier about eliminating the halo, the fringe. So I have that already. So I'll include that with the email tomorrow. And of course, a listing of upcoming events. Hope to see many of you at the Harrisburg Cemetery this Saturday morning at 8 o'clock. I was there last year and it was wonderful. It's really a great place to photograph. So much diversity and so much to shoot. So again, guys, thank you very much. Good night.
Good
Good
night.
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 Thanks again, Mark.
Oh, my pleasure.
All right.
Good night.
Thank you, Mark.
You're welcome.